just a moment.
Welcome to Axios House Chicago. Appreciate your coming. Appreciate the Axios events team, which has brought us all together. And a quick shout out to the Axios Chicago crew, which has been fantastic in making us feel welcome. I know we have a lot of Axios Chicago readers in the room, so thank you. Excited to have you. Today, we're going to have programming all day. We would love to have you stay here. We're going to be open until 8 p.m. We're away around the long lines at the United Center, so please come for light bites and beverages. And if you're posting on social, please use the hashtag Axios House. And as we plunge in here, just a reminder, every day you could write a book about. You know, people talk about the October surprise, but now it's almost, what's the August 20th surprise, the August 19th surprise? And people will talk about this convention, this week, this city, as long as people talk about politics. So we are excited and honored to be part of it. Our first guest, David Plouffe, is all about bringing people together around common causes. He was manager of Senator Barack Obama's Come From Behind 2008 presidential campaign. Then he was senior advisor to President Obama. He's now senior advisor to Harris for president. He has a BA from the University of Delaware. He's a Blue Hen, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Audacity to Win. David Plouffe, welcome to Axios. David, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Always good to be with you, Mike.
And we welcome our Axians around the world who are joining us on live stream. David, this morning you stopped by a Pennsylvania delegation breakfast, and you told me backstage there was a distinct energy.
Yeah, it did remind me a lot of 2008. So, there was energy, people all throughout the state, all 67 counties, Governor Shapiro, Mayor Parker, Mayor of Pittsburgh. I've been around politics a long time, and you kind of know when people are all in. And people are in an athletic posture to help figure out how to get those 19 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. And folks in that room have won tough races the last few cycles. So, yeah, it's an energy of how can I help? What can I do? And you love to see it, because to win a battleground state like that and the other battleground states, it requires that kind of effort. You got to have the candidate performing at a high level. You got to have a good theory of the case, but you got to have folks on the ground who know the state well, organizing and making it happen and reaching your vote goals. So I love to see that. I also stopped by the Delaware breakfast where they gave me an awesome 302 Blue Ends hat, so I appreciate that.
So your best merch so far at the convention?
It is my best merch, yes.
Very nice. And what you said, the folks at the Pennsylvania, you were talking about the '08 energy. You said people are ready to roll. What do you mean by that?
It's just like, what can I do? What do we need to do to get the number of votes we need in my county, in my precinct, in my state? And how can I help? And also giving advice, because they know the state well. So, that's what it takes to win. You need motivated people from all walks of life. And, you look at the donations and the volunteer sign-up so far to Kamala Harris, well over 50% of the people have never contributed or volunteered before. And again, I know in the Obama days, that was such a unique thing. Why does that matter? When someone in a community gets involved in a campaign who their friends and family members and neighbors have never seen got involved in politics, it makes them super interested. Why are you doing this? Tell me more about that. And so obviously the effort matters, but when you've got people who have never been involved in politics before, spending time on something, that gets noticed by other people in their circle, and that's what's super important.
Now, David, you're senior advisor to the Harris for President campaign, and you joined the campaign in motion, in progress, when it became the Harris-Walz campaign instead of the Biden-Harris campaign. I'm told that the campaign thought of you, they knew that you were the ultimate A-list in politics. They knew they wanted you if they could get you. You have a pretty good life. What made you willing to suit up?
Well, that was already an A-list campaign. Jen O'Malley Dillon is just a tremendous campaign manager. So, listen, I think I'm no different than all the other people around the country who are signing up to help. It's a unique circumstance. At that point, we had less than 100 days left. You gotta jump it and do all you can to do. And I've known Kamala Harris for a long time. Admire her, really like her as a person. Think she'd be a great president. And so that's what's really been encouraging. Whether you're a grassroots volunteer, at the precinct level in North Carolina or Pennsylvania, or you're people like me who've been involved in politics, everybody's willing to answer the call to do what they can. Obviously, this has been a campaign that's had a lot of change, and she's got a lot to do to introduce herself to the country, reintroduce herself to the country, lay out what she wants to do, how that contrasts with Trump, and execute these big moments like the convention, the first debate. So I think, you got to be willing to jump in. I think the future of the country is at stake, and so nothing I'd rather be doing right now than helping her become our 47th president.
What is your theory about how much she should fill in? People seem to like what they know now. What is your thinking about filling out biography, policy? Like, do they need to go deeper, or how do you approach that?
Well, first of all, biography is important. Values are important. How you grew up. She grew up, middle class family, her sister and her mom. Lessons she learned there informs how she'll act as president and all the things she's accomplished on behalf of people. Super important, particularly compare that to Trump, who's never really known sitting at that kitchen table trying to make it all work. It's all come easy to him. He doesn't understand what people who have to live within a budget go through. Every speech she gives, she's engaging with reporters on the trail as well. She's laying out what she do on Medicare and Social Security, on health care, on taxes. She gave a speech on cost cutting. So she'll continue to lay in detail, but I think the American people like what they're seeing because A, she's a breath of fresh air. Two, I think she's delivering a searing message about how she would focus on the middle class compared to Trump. And on things like health care, on abortion, she's being very, very detailed out there. So listen, I know this question, how much detail in it? Listen, I've run presidential campaigns, okay? There are a bunch of different things. They're going to diners and bars and community events. They're giving speeches. They're going big convention. There are debates. There's interviews. There are town halls. There's engaging with influencers, a new, very important part of politics. She will and do all of that. And so the key thing is, the way I think about it is, when people start voting, and we don't have election day in this country anymore, we have election month. So you don't have 77 days, you basically have 47 days. In the next 47 days, can people know as much about her background, her biography, the things she'd accomplished as a prosecutor and attorney general, what she wants to do as president, and then very importantly, for people to understand the stakes if Donald Trump's president. Project 2025, Trump's blueprint to become a dictator and really devastate the economy. His tariff is a sales tax of 20% on most products that Americans buy, would devastate. Economists say it would be almost a $4,000 tax increase on the middle class. Obviously, a third of the country lives under Trump abortion bans because the thing he seems most proudest about is his role in overturning Roe v. Wade. And we have to make sure voters understand he's not going to stop there. So there's a lot to get done, and there'll be many different ways to do that. And that's really the job of the campaign, is make sure you're reaching people where they are.
When you make small talk with David Plouffe, you're talking about the battleground map. So let's plunge in to the battleground states. How big is the map really?
Well, right now, it's 7 states in the congressional district of Nebraska. I would say 2 things about that. I think a month ago, I think it would have been hard for Democrats to compete in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, or North Carolina to win. I think those are all back now as credible states Kamala Harris could win. And secondly, Donald Trump and his brain trust, and I use that word loosely, we're running around talking about Minnesota, New Mexico, New Jersey, New York, all these states that are now out of reach for Trump. So I think it's 7 states, and that's important. That gives Kamala Harris many pathways to get the 270 electoral votes, all a little bit different in terms of how you get there. Some are going to be much more focused on turnout, some on swing, but it takes all of that, you know, and a good campaign knows exactly how you're going to reach your win number in those states. And it's a combination of new registrants, turnout, vote share amongst your base, and winning the true undecideds. And I think Kamala Harris has greatly improved the position of the Democratic Party in this race. We have a lot of work to do. 16 was super close, 20 was super close, 24 will be super close. And we're preparing for a race that'll come down to a vote or 2 per precinct. And I think we have the field organization in all those states, which is super important. People matter. People working in local offices in those communities every day, all those volunteers, even if that volunteer only reaches 1 or 2 people that day who may say, okay, now I'm going to vote, or now I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. If you think about that effort in the aggregate, it makes a huge difference. When states could come down to states, 8, 10, 12, 15,000 votes, it matters a great deal.
How much do you worry about Nevada, and how seriously do you take North Carolina?
I think North Carolina is winnable. I think, by the way, an important dynamic there is Mark Robinson, the gubernatorial candidate, is even more MAGA than Trump, which is saying something. And so we should win that governor's race by some margin. And so when you're engaged in politics, just like in business, you want to know, like, who are my customers? In politics, who's actually available to me? There's a bunch of people who right now are voting Democrat for governor who aren't yet Democrat for president. So we need to run a campaign to them. Huge opportunity. Nevada's always going to be tough. So you ask, listen, if you're involved in a presidential campaign, the minute you feel secure about a battleground state, you ought to get out of the business. Like, you always got to be worried about getting across the finish line. But we see how Nevada has become much more competitive. Great field organization there. I think Kamala Harris is a great candidate for Nevada. And so she's going to be spending time in all those states. Tim Walz will be, other surrogates, great field operations. So the key thing is you want to keep them all in the zone of probability. And right now, I think there's more pressure on Donald Trump from an electoral college standpoint than Kamala Harris. And that's a big change from where we were 4 weeks ago.
2 things for Vice President Harris to worry about. One, she's riding an enviable wave, will be written about as one of the incredible turnarounds in political history. And yet you've been around the block, as you mentioned at the top. You know those waves don't last.
Well, I'd say a couple things. We saw last night, again, reminded what an amazing person and President Joe Biden was. But it's just a fact that a lot of Americans were not thrilled about the rematch. So now they've got a new matchup, and they're excited about it, number one. And I think that's not going to dissipate. I think people are going to be excited all the way through to Election Day. Yes, but why? She's gotten off to a great start because she's done great. And I'm a student of political history, as are you. There's a lot of people who look like the next thing, who when you get on that presidential stage, campaign stage, which is the most withering scrutiny, the hottest spotlights, most people don't come out whole. They wither. She's met the moment, and I think people see that, and they think she's ready for this, number one. I have no doubt we'll make mistakes. There'll be moments where the press in particular puts us in the barrel, as we used to say in Obama days. There's going to be days where we're in the penalty box, but all you can do is control what you can control, which is if you're communicating the message you want to communicate to the people you think will decide the presidency, and you've got the organization in place, and they're making good decisions and progress every day, that's what's important. So she's gotten off to a great start because she's done great. And I think we'll see Thursday night a continuation of that. Obviously, you know, getting on the road, I think campaigning much more vigorously than Donald Trump is. I still believe that matters. We only have 77 days, so every day you're in a battleground state, in a county, in a community, it's a big win for you. And I think she and Tim Walz are going to. I'm curious why Trump's not campaigning more aggressively. You covered it in 2016. He was. I won't give him credit for many things. He campaigned hard. In 20, he was out there a lot in part because he was irresponsible around the pandemic. But he's got a really lazy schedule.
And yet not much seems to be sticking to him. What do you have that will stick to him?
Well, listen, he's going to get 46 to 48% of the vote. That's just a fact. Our goal and necessity is to get a little more than that. So, but what is sticking to him? In every battleground state, from a research perspective, there are more than 50% of the people who'd rather not a return of Trump, okay? So I wish that was 65. It should be, it's not. That's the country we're living in right now. Trump's got a big base of support, but we've got to tap into that, number one. Number two, Project 2025, I think, is going to stick to him. By the way, we've all had to kind of become amateur analysts of Donald Trump in the last 8 to 9 years. This guy doesn't like to run away from much. He doesn't like to back down. He's running, scurrying as fast as he can from Project 2025. Why? He knows it's going to hurt him. And by the way, his fingerprints are all over it. His DNA is all over it. His footprints are all over it. This is his blueprint. And it's not just the substance of 2025. They've got a database of people they want to bring into the government, MAGA loyalists, to enact it. So that's important. Abortion's hugely important to make sure you remind people of the story. The reason that 1/3 of the country lives under Trump abortion bans is because of Trump. His party will try and pass a national abortion ban. If they own Congress, you don't think he's going to sign it? Talking about criminalizing doctors, monitoring women who are pregnant. They clearly are anxious to go after IVF and other forms of fertility. Like, their assault on women and women's health is unprecedented. And so does every voter know all that? No, they don't. So I think we can do a good job over the next 77 days on his agenda, on abortion, on tax cuts. She's going to give a middle-class tax cut. He's going to pass on a sales tax to all the middle-class families in this country. There's a lot we can do. But the steady state of the race is Donald Trump's not going down to 40 or 42 or 44. That's just the reality. He's going to get his vote. We just got to get a little bit more.
A specific vulnerability for Vice President Harris. Mike Murphy, the longtime Republican consultant, said on Morning Joe this morning that if they can keep Donald Trump on a teleprompter, if they can get him on the right meds, that Republicans know how to run against a progressive from San Francisco. What do you do about that vulnerability?
Well, listen, I think for those of you who don't live in battleground states, you don't see the campaign as it's unfolding day to day, right? But if you're in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you see we're running ads that are talking about all her work as a prosecutor and attorney general, going after transnational gangs, going after sexual predators, holding them accountable. So we're going to tell the story. She's been motivated by protecting women and children and families. So I would say they know how to run that. They've been trying to run it for 30 or 40 years. This ain't the 80s. So, we're sensitive to the attacks. We'll respond to them in kind. We're also going to be on offense. And by the way, let's talk about Trump. Candidates matter more in a presidential campaign than any other race. They matter in every other race. But everybody sees these people. We're going to have one, maybe more debates. People are going to watch that. They're watching very carefully because who the American president is matters to people. And you watch him day to day. He is a detriment to their campaign. And so when Mike says if they can keep him on the teleprompter, that's right. He's a 78-year-old former president. We talk about him like a child, okay? If he can't execute basics about talking about what he wants to do we really want this guy with the nuclear codes sitting in the Situation Room, sitting in the Oval Office? So, yes, I think candidate-wise, Kamala Harris is reaching people. She's communicating with them in a way that clearly they are finding to be effective, and Donald Trump's not. So a campaign, yes, it's ads, yes, it's field operation, all important, but the most important thing in a presidential campaign is the candidate.
You mentioned at least one debate in September on ABC. What is the likelihood there will be a second debate in October?
Well, we'll see if he shows up. Not 100% sure he shows up.
What do you think is the chance that that does not occur?
I don't know. I don't want to get in his brain. I don't know. But we'll see. We're going to prepare like he's going to be there. I hope he does. And then we'll see where we are. There's obviously going to be a vice presidential debate, which is great. And I think, listen, that debate is so important for Kamala Harris because there will still be many people in America who don't know as much about her as Donald Trump or even Joe Biden. She's got an opportunity to talk about her background, what she wants to do, and on a stage with him. And so I think that I've been involved in a lot of debates through the years. They're always challenging because you can plan and practice all you want, but when the bell goes off, things happen that you're not anticipating, whether the question, your opponent. But she is someone who I think she knows why she's running. She knows what she stands for. She knows the threat that Donald Trump presents, and I think she'll be eager to prosecute that case. So it'll be a really important moment.
She's been talking more about freedom, less about democracy, as President Biden had been. Why that switch?
Well, listen, I think freedom encompasses a lot of things. Obviously, freedom is, freedom for women to make their own health care decisions, freedom for people to read the books they want to read, but freedom is also living in a country where the person who gets the most votes wins, where losers actually still love their country. So that's going to be an important part of the election. And when you talk to swing voters out in battleground states, the fact that Trump is saying again he's not going to basically embrace the election results, he never conceded last time, that bothers people, okay? And this is unique to Trump. I mean, in 2022 in the congressional elections, Kari Lake was an outlier, there was a few others. But for the most part, Republicans who lost their elections conceded their opponent, congratulated their opponent. Democrats, of course, did that. This democracy requires that the people who don't win elections respect the results. So that's a very important part of the frame. But I think freedom is something that she feels strongly about. I think it covers a lot of issues. I think it's also aspirational, and I think it's working for her.
And was it that democracy was more backward looking?
No, I think she talks about democracy in every speech. Democracy will be part of speeches tonight, Wednesday, Thursday. But at the end of the day, I think freedom really does cover a lot of important areas to the American electorate. And of course, the flip side is Donald Trump is a threat to all those things. When someone basically says they want to be a dictator on day one, when they talk about their role models, talks about Putin and Xi and Orban, that gives you a pretty good sense of how that person wants to act as president. He does not want guardrails. By the way, Project 2025, Trump's blueprint, if you're to win, a lot of it is about removing the guardrails. So Donald Trump can be an all-powerful, all-encompassing figure in our lives. And I think that's going to be a very important part of the election. There's not, maybe 40% of the people would be okay with that. There's 60% of the people that don't want Trump to be given that kind of absolute power.
We're about to get the hook for all our Chicago friends here, readers of Axios Chicago. This is hometown night at the convention. It's Obama night at the conventions. We'll have speeches from both the former First Lady, the former president. You've worked with both of them on speeches for many years, and you had a little musical analogy for the way that the two approach.
Well, first, it always is, to be great to be back here in Chicago. And thank you for this weather. I mean, it could be 95 and muggy. I mean, this is remarkable. And it's great for all the delegates who are here. So I think in their preparation, I'd say, Michelle Obama has always been a little bit more of the concert pianist. Her speech is done a little bit earlier. He's a little bit more of the jazz musician riffing a little bit. But I will not spill any secrets, but I think the people in the hall tonight, those watching at home, I will say an important part of a convention audience is actually people who won't watch the convention tonight, but we'll see clips the next day on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. And even though, they're not in their 20s anymore, I think that they are people who will say interesting things tonight, that interesting people want to share, and will reach a lot of those hard-to-reach voters. But stay tuned. I think these are two really important speeches tonight, and I think they're going to do a lot of good for Kamala Harris.
What can President Obama do for Vice President Harris?
Well, first of all, he can set the stakes of the election, the world, what America will look like if Kamala Harris is president, and what it'll look like if Donald Trump is president. He knows Kamala Harris very well. He can talk about her values, some of the things they've worked on together through the years, and the kind of person she'll be, and kind of how she sees the world. I think that was one of his great strengths as an elected official, as a president, is his biography, how he grew up. He saw the world through the window of people who are middle class, trying to get in the middle class. She is the same way. And I think that's super powerful. And I think he can excite people about her and about the stakes. And I think that's what he intends to do tonight.
I don't think Mrs. Obama would mind me mentioning that a fun fact is she has outsold the president in books.
Just don't say that to him. Yes.
He knows it's true.
Oh, I know he does. Yeah.
What is the power that she could bring as a surrogate for Vice President Harris?
Well, she's just an incredibly popular and well thought of leader in America. Kind of crosses age, party, demography. And she doesn't speak out that often about politics. And so when she does, I think people are super interested in what she has to say. She knows Kamala Harris personally. I think she'll speak as someone who knows her well and believes that not just does she have the right ideas, but this is the kind of person you want in the Oval Office as your president. So whenever she speaks, it does seem to get really outsized attention. And again, I think the delegates will like it. I think those sitting at home watching the convention tonight will like it. But those tens of millions of people are going to vote in this election who are not going to watch the convention. But we'll see some clips. Clips from her speech will be the kind of content that they want to engage in and share.
And as we say goodbye, one fun thing, you've known the vice president going back to 2007, right? Tell me what she's like behind the scenes, how she's grown, maybe one encounter you've had with her off camera.
Well, I'm just impressed again by how she's met this moment. I mean, think about it. One day you're the vice president, you're thinking about how to help the president get reelection. The next day you're the nominee and the biggest news story on the globe. And I think she's met it with grace and with joy and confidence. Yeah, I've known her since 2007. I mean, I met Kamala Harris for the first time in Iowa. She was the district attorney in California, in San Francisco County, and she was out knocking on doors. And she did it, if I recall, it was about, well, Mike, you might remember, it was below zero. She got there every day knocking on doors. Elected official, no different than the average volunteer in Iowa. She gets grassroots politics. It's what she believes in. And she's really funny and warm. She's just a really good human being. And I actually think that matters. Like, I think Trump's wrong on just about every policy under the sun. I don't think he has respect for our Constitution. I don't think he has respect for our allies. He's also not a good person. And call me quaint, but I think that matters. And she's a very, very good person who I think would be an amazing president, but also an amazing role model as our president.
And sounds like willing to work.
Yeah, roll up the sleeves, do the work.
Thank you, Chicago, and thank you, David Plouffe.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for a great conversation.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Good morning, guys. Our next guest needs no introduction. He's the congressman from South Carolina, civil rights leader, a legislator with many hats. Please welcome Congressman Jim Clyburn. Thank you for joining us.
After last night, I may drop sleep in here.
Congressman, you've been a leader in the party through everything that has happened in Democratic politics since the 60s. You also taught high school history. Where do you put this moment in politics in historical perspective?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here. I put this moment very squarely in the presidential election of 1876, at the year that we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of this great country, and it is a great country. You no need of being made great. We got to figure out how to make that greatness accessible and affordable for all of its citizens, and that's what this is all about. In 2 years, we're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of this country. And people who say that we've never been here before or nothing has been like this before, they just don't know the country's history. What was going on January 6th was an attempt to get the president's election into the House of Representatives, which is exactly what happened in 1876. And they knew the success of that. It was that president's election that led to the end of Reconstruction and to Jim Crow. And they knew that if they could get this election into the House, what you now see as Project 2025, which they've developed in the interim, was already in development. I know the history of the Heritage Foundation. I know the history very well. I used to teach high school, but I studied at the higher level. And so what they were trying to do is implement an autocracy, is what they were laying the foundation for. So that's what this is. So anybody wants to know what's going on today, Google President's Election 1876. Take a look at what happened. Those three states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, had 20 electoral votes. When the election was over, and they counted the electoral votes in 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes had 165, but needed 185 to be president. Samuel Tilden had 184, needed only one more vote.
The only time.
I'm sorry?
The only time that the House has decided.
The only time this ever happened. And the anti-democratic forces succeeded in 1876. And the anti-democratic forces figured if it's happened before, it can happen again. And that's what was going on. So that's where I put this. This election, every election is important. You never hear me call this the most important election in our history, but you will find this to be the case. This is the most consequential election in this country since 1860.
President Biden yesterday gave a powerful speech. What do you see as his most important legacy?
He brought us back from the brink. There are two prongs. Well, let me put it this way. There are bookends to his presidency. Martin Luther King Jr. once wrote, many of you know, he only lived to be 39 years old. He knew he was not going to have a long life, and he wrote about that and spoke about it often. And he said on one occasion, it matters not how long you live, but how well you live. And I think that we should think about that in terms of President Joe Biden. He may not get as long a presidency as he set out, but he will have, in history, one of the most productive presidencies ever. He'll be right up there with Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and I think he'll be in the top three when it comes to production. Now, the problem, I think, is this. Bookend his election. Let's bookend his service. On the one end, vice president to the first African-American president of the United States. He becomes president. He picks the first woman to be vice president of the United States. He makes a decision to leave the stage and endorses what we hope will be the first woman to be president of the United States. That's the consequences of this election. We will succeed on November 5th. He will be bookended with having been vice president to the first African American and handed off to the first woman American. That's a great history that nobody will ever be able to replicate if he pulls it off.
The congressional.
Okay.
The Congressional Black Caucus was behind President Biden until the very moment he decided he would not run again. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the root of that loyalty, and was it hard to make the switch to Harris?
Well, it was not hard to make the switch, but it is based in the record. I don't know why anybody would look at Joe Biden's record as president and not be impressed by it if you're African American. If you're anti-African American, you might have a problem with it. But if you're not anti-African American, you look at the first guy to select as his running mate, a woman of color, the first guy to put. We've had 5 women on the Supreme Court before Ketanji, and nobody's ever seriously discussed a black woman. Why was that? So he puts a black woman on the Supreme Court. Then he looks at the courts of appeals, and he puts more black women on the courts of appeal than all other presidents combined. So you just look at it from the judiciary. Then look at the legislation. Every promise he made, he kept. Now, a lot of people says, well, we didn't do the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. Yes, we did. We passed it 3 times and sent it to the Senate. Do you blame Joe Biden for the Senate filibuster? Do you blame Joe Biden for the Supreme Court that got rid of Roe v. Wade? So he was stymied at every front by this Supreme Court. But you can't blame him for that. But he did everything he said he was going to do. The thing that gets me more than anything else is on student loan debt relief. He did everything he said he was going to do with student loan debt relief. Every time he did something, this Supreme Court was called upon to stop him. And then he even found workarounds for that. The public service debt, student loan debt relief, he did that in spite of what the Supreme Court did otherwise. So black folks knew that. Those who didn't get all of their information from whatever you call it, your social media might be, if you decide to look at the record, you were privy to all of that. So those of us in the Congressional Black Caucus who meet every Wednesday for lunch and discuss other things, sometimes, we eat too, but we discuss a lot of stuff. We knew what the record was. We had a part of making that record. The Rescue Act, the Infrastructure Bill, the Chips and Science Act, the PAC Act, Inflation Reduction Act. My late wife fought diabetes for 30 years. She was a 4-shot-a-day diabetic. Her insulin bill 1 month I saw was $800 for 1 month. She had good insurance. However, today, that same insulin bill, because of Joe Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, $35. Black folks knew that. We know where diabetes lives. And so it was easy for us. And I never could understand why people says, why are y'all sticking with him? And I had some people, I sat down with some folks at a midnight meeting up in New York about 2 weeks before Joe Biden got out of the race. And they said, why are you sticking with him? I said, why shouldn't we?
Because the record speaks for it.
It speaks for
itself. Looking ahead, you've been a witness to Vice President Harris's career since she's been in the Senate. She went to your fish fry in 2019. What differences do you see between Senator Harris and now candidate Harris?
Senator Harris became Vice President Harris. And nobody goes to college to be vice president. It's a learning curve. Joe Biden Go back and look at the first part of his vice presidency and how he ended up. Everybody was given a learning curve, but nobody wanted to give her a learning curve. And I'm sitting and I'm watching her. I've been watching her since before she got elected to the Senate. I was out in California and witnessed part of her campaign for the United States Senate, though I knew of her even before she got into elective office. So I've been watching her all this time. You know, politics is I've been doing politics since the age of 8. That's a true story. I started following politics during the 1948 presidential election. That's how I'm such a Harry Truman person. So I've been doing politics all this time. So I'm watching her. And the night she jumped on that plane and flew down to Tennessee, when those 2 young African-American boys and that one, the white woman, were denied or kicked out of the legislature, the speech she gave that night, I'm sitting there, and right in the middle of that speech, I said, she has arrived. I saw it, I felt it. And then she responded to Dobbs. I said, she's cooking.
Yep.
You know, so it was easy for me. And so we stuck with Joe Biden. And when Joe Biden decided to leave the stage, he called me, read me his statement right around 1 o'clock. I will never forget it because it was my 45th anniversary of my 39th birthday.
Happy belated birthday.
July 21st, my birthday, is when I got that call. And when I got that call, he read me a statement, and he says, and I told him there was a little thing missing out of the statement. And he asked me what it was. I said, you can't leave the stage not endorsing. He said, I will put out a second statement within the hour. And when that second statement came out at 1:46, at 1:47, I was on the phone. And I roped in my little kitchen cabinet. I said, we are all in for Kamala. So we had been studying her for a long time. We knew she was ready. A lot of people missed this. You remember when the United States of America got in trouble over the so-called submarine deal with Australia and what it did with our relationship with France? Who did Joe Biden send to France? Kamala went. She resolved that issue. And we hadn't heard a mumbling word since. She has arrived. She's ready for this.
I'm going to get in trouble for asking another question, but this one's important. What is her responsibility if she wins to people of color all across the country to feel seen, to feel heard, and to be represented?
Do the things that are necessary, proposals, policy, legislation, to make the greatness of this country accessible and affordable for all of its citizens. Education. What do we need to do to make education accessible and affordable? I don't care what it is. Housing. How do we go about making it accessible and affordable? There are a lot of things in this country that are accessible and not affordable. And there are a lot of things that are affordable and not accessible. So that's how you balance this. And I've had these discussions with her, like I've had them with Joe, and I go all the way back to Bill Clinton with these kinds of discussions. And so you will see, let's take the infrastructure bill. When we passed the infrastructure bill, everybody was talking about roads and bridges and water and sewage and all that kind of stuff. I sat down with a group of about 20 people. Tim was one of them who I'm going to be meet with his Vermont delegation tomorrow. And I said to them, I said, how many of you remember what we call the internet when it first came online? I don't know how many of you remember it. We call it the information highway. That's what it was called. And I said to those 20 members that day, we are not going to let an infrastructure bill go out of this House unless we treat the information highway the same way we treat the interstate highway. Because that's how you make telemedicine available and affordable, through the internet. This education. What happened when we had COVID-19? The kids that got left out because they did not have the internet at home. The kids who had the internet at home, like my granddaughter, she was fine. She had a classmate, a good friend, that couldn't pass the proficiency exams they got back because she didn't have the internet at home. So these are the kinds of things we have to apply to everything. She's going to do that. And she will be building upon what this administration has done in a real good way.
Congressman Clyburn, thank you so much for joining us.
Well,
So
thank you all so much for having me.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? So thankful for all of you all joining us this morning and for sticking around with us. We're going to keep this program going forward. My name is Eugene Scott. I'm a host here at Axios Live, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, the Progressive Policy Institute, for their partnership to make this event possible. If you could give them an applause, that would be awesome. And so without further ado, I want to bring a few of the folks affiliated with the Institute to the stage to continue this conversation about the working class. First, I'm going to bring up Will Marshall. He's president of the Progressive Policy Institute. David Evans, general secretary of the Labor Party, and Jonathan Ashworth, chief executive of Labor Together, former member of Parliament for Leicester South. Thank you guys for joining us. Great. Just have a seat. We're just going to ask you a few questions about some of the work you all are doing in the UK. And so the title of this event, as you know, is Winning the Working Class. And I'll start with a pretty easy question. What are the core decisions to swing the voter pendulum for this decisive bloc?
Could I start? That's not an easy question.
Okay.
That's a tough question, but I can only speak for our experience in the UK, where in 2019 we lost catastrophically. We went down to our worst defeat since 1935, principally because the support with working class voters was fractured. We lost their support, their confidence, their trust. So in a very short space of time, under Keir Starmer's leadership, we had to recover that trust and confidence. Now, that had to start with, first of all, understanding, listening, making sure that we were speaking about the issues that working class voters were concerned about rather than the issues we were concerned about. We went all around the world, including speaking to our friends here, to learn about the success stories. One of the places we went to was Germany, where Olaf Scholz had won a victory for the left in Germany. And one of the key things we took away from that was the use of the word respect. Working class voters did not feel that we respected them. So we borrowed the livery and the look and the word respect that was core to Olaf Scholz's victory in Germany. And that was the starting point for us to rebuild that trust and confidence. You'll see here, these are our first steps, Keir Starmer's first steps in government, which are speaking to the issues that working class voters were concerned about in a way that was realistic and practical, not pie in the sky, not lavish promises that couldn't be kept, but principally drilling down on cost of living, which was the core issue, safety and security. Working class voters in particular do not feel safe because they have lost out when the economy crashes. It's working class voters that pay the price. Similarly, they don't feel secure in their communities. We had to make sure that we were speaking for them and with them, rather than for issues that were maybe not central to their concerns. I'll stop there, but it's a big question, a tough question, not an easy one.
Let me ask a follow-up then. What do you think is the origin of the disconnect between lawmakers and working class voters?
Okay, I'll pick that one up. And can I just start by saying I'm absolutely delighted to be here at the convention. My first time at a US convention. And the energy here is immense. And we're all really excited about the way in which your new nominee has really shaken up the race, and it is fascinating as an observer of election campaigns to be watching how your rival, President Trump, clearly does not know how to deal with her. He's having these tantrums on every platform he speaks on. And look, I'm here as a Labour strategist, not as a representative of Labour government. And you know, the UK government will obviously work with anyone the American people put in the White House because the special relationship is so solid. I'm just saying that for any diplomats in the audience who are worried about where I'm taking this. But as a Labour strategist, we all want you to beat this guy, not just for you guys, but for the world. So please beat him. Please beat him. So how do you beat him? I think I want to come with a warning for you, but also for something for you to think about. Look at what's happening globally. Incumbent governments are losing. And they're losing because we've been through a pandemic, we've been through an energy crisis, we've been through a cost of living crisis, and working class voters have felt disillusioned. They felt governments are not on their side because, frankly, their paychecks are not paying the bills. Their paychecks are not putting the same food on the table that it used to put on the table 4 or 5 years ago. So the first thing is you need an economic policy which understands and recognises that people are struggling, and you need a plan to cut costs. You've had that plan, inflation is stabilising, and that you really need to run on that. You need to be telling people that you've got a plan to put more money in people's pockets, and that's what we did with the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, which was a massive turnaround. 4 or 5 years ago, in our last general election, we lost our industrial heartlands, what we call the Red Wall, because remember in the UK, we are the red party, not the blue party. So we lost the equivalent of our blue states to the Conservatives 4 years ago, and people thought this was a long-term realignment. We lost it on the economy. We won it back by focusing on these bread and butter issues. The second thing is people want fairness. The immigration debate in the UK is as toxic and as nasty as it is over here, and our opponents, the Conservatives, like your opponents, the Republicans, really demonise migrants, do dog whistle politics, suggesting that a Labour government or a Democrat administration will let migrants in, will not have will not bring security to the borders, it will be unfair, and all that kind of stuff. We dealt with that by having a clear policy on immigration that, we accepted and understood that people want fairness at our borders. We didn't play into the demonising of immigrants, of course not, but we wanted a fair policy at our borders, and that was really important for us. The third thing in the UK to keep in touch with working class voters is healthcare. We're very proud of our what we call our National Health Service in the United Kingdom. We have free healthcare. We led the world on that 70, 80 years ago. The Conservatives have really ran it down. Conservatives don't really believe in healthcare in our country. They've run it down, and people have been waiting longer and longer and longer to get to get surgery or get an appointment to see their local family doctor. So we really focus on a plan to fix healthcare as well. So cost of living, having a fair policy and not running away from the debate on immigration, taking it on, but reassuring people you had a policy on it to deal with the issues at the border, and having a plan for healthcare. That is how we won and how we showed we were in touch with working class voters.
Awesome. Will, so you are paying attention to working class issues globally and movements. What have you seen beyond the U.S. Borders that you think will have a huge impact on this election in November?
Well, what strikes us is the parallels between the challenges that all these center-left parties are facing all across the transatlantic world. We have a deeply alienated working class that's in revolt against establishment elites, really on both parties, because Trump is a revolutionary of sorts for Republicans. And so, in France, we saw the far right rack up the biggest gains in recent elections. The Reform Party, which is to the right of the Tories in Britain, also gained at the Tories' expense in this election that Labour won. So we're seeing the populist right still rising. And what is critical from our point of view is that we learn from these great successes, and we've had a wonderful relationship and dialogue with Labour since Keir Starmer took over, because we wanted to see how they were going to do it. Would you win back 35 or 36 of the red wall districts that you lost, all working class districts? And we have a similar challenge. Democrats are great on the north side of the diploma divide. That is, all the people in this country that have a 4-year degree or better. We're winning those voters in increasing percentages and numbers, but we're losing on the south side. We're losing among non-college voters. And that unbalances our party in two ways. One, it just keeps us too small. We need to be a bigger party to compete all across the country. Why are we so non-competitive in vast swaths of red America? That's crazy. We can change that with a concerted strategy. But it's also a matter, really, of the party's soul, right? Who do we represent? Who do we fight for? It's always been the working middle class of America. And when you stand for this class, this is a class that brings social stability, that stands for ordered progress, that stands for inclusion and pluralism. But we've let it fall apart. We've lost the bottom of that coalition. We got to get it back.
I want to talk a bit about the recent victory that the Labour Party had. Was there a moment, like a critical decision that was made that you think switched the game and made you move in the direction of victory?
I'm sure Jonathan's got, I hope we got a similar-ish answer, but maybe different answers might rhyme. Keir Starmer made it absolutely clear, and we have a prosecutor in Keir Starmer. And that's an interesting parallel and an important thread that runs through his leadership, that crime, law and order is absolutely central to the stability and safety of working class voters. But Keir Starmer made it absolutely clear that he was going to put country before party. He made it absolutely clear that he was going to put achieving power beyond being a party of protest, and he made it absolutely clear that he would take difficult decisions. So there were many difficult decisions along the way that needed to demonstrate the character, his character as leader, and the character of the Labour government. And just not to dodge your question, but just to say that in the first days of the new Labour government, we were challenged with riots and disorder on our streets. And he has demonstrated that conviction, that strength of character to deal with those riots, to end the chaos. Because we campaigned on the basis that the Conservative government was creating chaos, which, again, speaking to those safety and security concerns of working class voters, they wanted an end to the chaos. And there could be nothing more visceral, more vivid in terms of illustrating that when there's riots in working class communities. So that strength and clarity and conviction was absolutely key.
I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, we're the experts in the UK at losing elections in the Labour Party. I mean, if you look at our history, we are probably one of the least successful progressive parties in the Western world, frankly. Yeah. I mean, since the Second World War, I mean, Keir Starmer is only the what we had. We had Clement Attlee in '45, Harold Wilson in the '60s, Tony Blair, and Keir Starmer. He's only the fourth guy to take us into government since the war. I mean, that's crazy when you think about it. I mean, how many presidents have you had? How many Democratic presidents have you had since 1945? I mean, somebody can shout out, I don't know. But you've had more than 4, yeah? Yeah, you've had more than 4, right? So that tells you a bit about how, and why do we lose, right? Why does the Labour Party lose? Because people sometimes don't trust us with the money and the economy. In recent years, they've come not to trust us on immigration. They think we're the guys whose heart is in the right place. They want to stand up for the poor. They want to stand up for the homeless. They want to stand up for people who've come to the country and who've got from very vulnerable circumstances. But yeah, they want to put up your tax to pay for all these things. So we had to do a few things. We had to show that we could be competent on the economy. We were helped that the Conservatives gave us a crazy Prime Minister called Liz Truss for a month, who absolutely crashed the UK economy, so that helped us. But we had to reassure people that we could be trusted on the economy and we wouldn't be whacking up tax on working people. And that meant we had to take some tough decisions. That meant we had to say to our base, we're not going to do all the things that you want. We're not going to be able to do all the things to change Britain after 14 years of the Conservatives. We're sorry, but we had to reassure people we could be trusted on the economy. Again, we had to be trusted on immigration, which is why we had a clear policy to deal with the problems that we've got at our borders on the English coast. And when we said we wanted to fix the NHS, it had to be realistic and believable. So actually, our policies for the NHS were they're quite small actually, but the fact that they were small came across as more credible. If we'd made big outlandish policies, people would have thought they're going to put up your tax again. But here's the crucial thing as well: you have to own a sense of the future. You have to look like you're the guys who have got, what's coming down the track, and you own that, and you can speak to that, and you speak to that with an authority. So we own the future. We weren't harking back to the past. I just want to make one word of warning for you all, though. And your electoral setup is different to ours. This might not be relevant in every bit of the states, but I think it could be relevant in Michigan, right? Those of you who Google me after this, you'll think, who is this phony when you Google me? Because I'm sat here lecturing you all about how to win an elections. I lost my own race. I'm supposed to be sat here as a member of Prime Minister Starmer's cabinet. I'm not sat here as a member of Prime Minister Starmer's cabinet. I'm here as a Labour strategist because I worked on our national general election campaign and every day was working on that while I lost my own race. Why did I lose my own race? Over Gaza. Yeah? A combination of, in my constituency, Muslim voters. I had a very big Muslim population, and a lot of urban liberal voters turned against Labour. Only in a handful of districts, but nonetheless, in districts which should have been considered bankers for the Labour Party, we lost. Now, my hunch is that over here, people will want to come out to stop Trump. But I just think you have to have at your back of your mind, is the Gaza issue going to be a problem with some of your urban liberal voters? Will they stay at home? And how do you mobilise them? I think in the end, stopping Trump will mobilise them. But it was a bigger problem in the UK than we anticipated. And I am the living proof of that because I'm sat here no longer as a member of parliament, but as a strategist. So that is just something I think you guys just need to take into account and think about.
Well, we're glad you're here, but we are out of time. And I want to express my appreciation for your support for this event and for coming to share your thoughts with all of us. Thank you. Pleasure. We are going to have a brief break while we do some stage rearrangements. And next up, we're going to have Hans Nichols from Axios.
Okay, good morning again. I will let everyone get their coffee. My name is Hans Nichols. I want to thank Eugene for that interesting conversation. And I'm going to invite my guest up here, Senator Gary Peters from Michigan. For your purposes, he's the head of the DSCC. Senator Peters, great to see you.
It's great to be with you. Great to be with you.
I'm going to do a quick prerogative here and say that 2 years ago, Senator Peters and I were in entirely different circumstances. We were doing a motorcycle trip around Michigan.
Right.
And let me clarify, I was in a rental car, a Kia Compact, and he was on the motorcycle. But, you know, and I think some of your motorcycles then might have been a little bit interrupted by some of the Trump signs you saw in Upper Michigan.
Yeah.
And I just wanted your sort of temperature barometer read. Are there more Trump signs this year than 2 years ago, and then compare to 2016 and 2020?
Yeah, actually, we just completed the tour, which I do every year. Official business. We do meetings all across the state. But if you're going to go from point A to point B, do that on a motorcycle. And then I have guest riders, labor unions, veterans, others, 25, 30, 40 bikes that ride with me. But it does give you a sense of what's happening on the ground. And I'm happy to say that there are fewer Trump signs. They're there. You get a preponderance of Trump signs in northern Michigan, which is the redder areas of the state. But there were fewer signs this trip than I've seen the last 2 cycles.
That's interesting. What do you attribute that to?
Usually it's about enthusiasm. So there may not be that kind of enthusiasm, but I don't know if there's a real scientific basis on signs, so I want to be real careful about that. I'm a data guy. I don't know if that's not part of our equation, but you know, anecdotal stuff
they're traders making bets and moves off of your sign barometer.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it was interesting. So hopefully that's hopeful. And we're feeling, I feel the energy on the ground. For this ticket, for Kamala Harris, it was quite apparent even in that ride. I mean, people were coming up to me saying, I'm just so excited, I'm getting engaged, and young people in particular.
So you want to grow your majority. Last year, you told me you're going to pick up 52 seats.
Right.
You ended up at 51, but you were sort of the most optimistic out there, and your prediction turned out to be truer than a lot of the other ones.
Yeah.
What's your prediction for this cycle?
Yeah, and we came real close to that 52, very, really close in Wisconsin, but no one was mad at me for 51. That was everybody was pretty happy about that, and I'm confident that we're gonna hold the 50 seats that we have. You know, we've got to bring back all of our incumbents. West Virginia is not one that's going to be in play for us. So it's all the incumbents, and Michigan, which doesn't have an incumbent but was an incumbent state, and we're not going to lose Michigan on my watch. That's not going to happen. We're going to make sure that we keep that democratic for those of you out there. So that gets us at 50, but I have optimism, and I believe we've got a shot in both Florida and Texas, and those are very real. So, you know, as the DS chair, my number one job is to bring all the incumbents back, and they remind me of that just about every week that I'm there. That's my number one job, is to do that. But we also want to make sure we've got a couple extra, although I'm confident that Tim Walz will be in the seat for sure for us to break the tie, but we're going to shoot for at least 51.
When you say you're optimistic about Florida and Texas, are you moving money there yet?
We've made some investments there. We
How
have
much?
On the ground. Well, I mean, we made investments in the ground there.
As a former financial advisor, you kind of know the importance of diversification, shall we say?
Well, that's true. And so we want to make sure we invest because they are very strong potentials for us, but we'll move more money. And we watch it. I watch the data all the time. And just like last cycle when we made history, I mean, there were some states where we were putting money in, but then at the end, just to give you an example, I mean, I knew we could win Pennsylvania, but some of those numbers were getting concerning after the debate, if you recall. And I said, like, every single penny of new money we get, we're going into Pennsylvania. And that paid off because we got to 51.
What's the last date on the calendar that you can flood a state with money?
Well, it gets hard, but with digital, you can do that fairly late now. But the on-ground stuff, you need to start making those investments now because you can't just build a structure overnight.
And just after Labor Day, flood the market.
Yeah, and but you got to build the infrastructure. If you build the infrastructure, then you get volunteers. The volunteer part, depending on the enthusiasm that's on the ground, you use paid canvassers, so we have money to do that. But the great news now is that we just have incredible energy. I mean, I've done a couple campaign kickoffs for folks, and the number of volunteers that are showing up. In fact, just in Michigan, we've been recruiting for our one campaign, which is for all of our statewide races and our local races. And for a year and a half, we were recruiting volunteers. But by 1 week after President Biden's decision and Kamala Harris in the race, we doubled our volunteers statewide in just 1 week. And that's continuing. And I was at one of the kickoffs. It was a beautiful Saturday in Michigan, it's sometimes hard to get volunteers on a beautiful day because they might want to do other things like the lakes and others, or ride a motorcycle. We had great turnout, a lot of young people, and I would say about half the young people that were there told me it's the first time they ever worked on a campaign.
That's an interesting metric as well, just the volunteer uptick.
Right.
There's a little bit of a chess match between you and your counterpart, Steve Daines. He has Montana. He's salivating over that. Could you rank the states for me on what you think is going to be hardest for your incumbents to protect?
Well, Montana clearly is a tough state for us.
It's tougher than Ohio. Excuse me.
Yeah, Ohio's tough too. So those are both our two tough states, and they're not presidential battleground states. We're not going to see Kamala Harris campaigning in those states. Certainly not in Montana. And so it's on us to do the kind of organizing and the organization that we need. But we got John Tester, who is a guy who just knows how to win. He's as authentic as you can possibly be. If you wanted a guy, picture if you want a central casting character for Montana, it's John Tester. If you've seen the show Yellowstone, I say he's our Kevin Costner. For
Kevin Costner's actually walking around saying, like, I'm kind of the John Tester.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Yeah, that's exactly right.
How much can a Senate candidate, even the testers, even a political athlete like that, how much can they outrun the presidential ticket? What's your back of the envelope sort of number?
Well, I don't have a number, but they can. And especially where the other advantage we have for Montana is that although it's a huge state geographically, population-wise, it's a congressional seat basically. So in a congressional seat, retail politics can matter. You can actually talk. Michigan, I can't talk to 10 million people, but in a congressional seat, and John will tell you, and he's told me, Gary goes, that when I'm back in Montana, I have folks come up to me and say, John, I really like what you're doing. I don't agree with everything you are, but I like you. And he says they're saying that to him now more than they ever have his whole career. So that's another on-the-ground metric.
The only candidate to really outrun the president in the presidential in the last few cycles is Susan Collins. Small state.
Right.
She did by 6 points and just barely, got across the line. But there are not a lot of new arrivals in Maine. There are a lot of new arrivals in Montana. What is the data telling you about who the new arrivals in Montana are? Are they, disaffected Republicans that want to move up to, Kalispell? Are they sort of tech refugees that want to go to Bozeman that are more left-leaning? What are you seeing?
It's really a little bit of both. I don't have an actual metric to be able to determine that. Specifically, it's hard because to get that kind of data there.
What does Tester think? What does his fingertip feel for?
He feels good about that. Folks are coming in, but you have to remember because of the small number of votes there, 15,000 votes will make the difference in the race. And so that's where you can use that retail politics. I guarantee you he's talked to more than that over the years that he has been there. The other element to turn out vote is the tribal communities. We have a number of tribes there and have our Native American voters to make sure that they're registered and are voting can make a significant difference, especially on that margin.
Those of us that covered a lot of the tax debates the last few years saw the importance of Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin in sort of determining the size of, how big tax cuts would be, what would happen on the corporate front. If we get to a sort of 50-50 Senate, very close, which Republicans do you anticipate dealing with the most? Who are the Republicans that are going to sort of mirror Sinema and Manchin?
I don't think there's any mirror of those two. So I don't think that's there. It's harder with Republicans because some of the folks that you could work with have left, and they're replaced by folks who are not as easy to work with. So it is becoming more complicated and challenging.
Murkowski?
Well, she's certainly somebody who will work. And Collins, you mentioned Collins too. There are two senators, and Susan Collins is ranked as the most bipartisan senator, so she works across the aisle.
Should every Senate candidate adopt the no taxes on tips policy?
Well, that's up to every Senate candidate to make that decision. I personally think it's a good policy, but we'll see what the candidates do.
Does that fly through? We're going to have a big, and sorry to turn this to go from politics to straight to the 2025 great tax rewrite, but I've got the senator here and we're going to do it. Is that the easiest? Is the taxes on tips? Does that fly through? Do you feel like there's bipartisan consensus to make that exempt?
I haven't had a chance to check the temperature on my Republican colleagues, but usually I say nothing is easy that flies through in the United States Senate right now. So we'd have to check the temperature on that.
When we talk more broadly about tax cuts, extending whatever happened during the Trump era. Both Harris and Trump are talking about new rates. Are you at all concerned about deficit spending?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, we have to make sure our fiscal house is in order. We've got to be thinking that through. And it is about priorities. A budget is a priority statement. Where do you set your priorities? Where do you invest money? Just like we do at DSCC, where am I investing the money to get the best bang for the dollar? It's not an infinite source of money, and we can't think of that way with the federal budget as well. And so we have to have those. But, it's a three-legged stool whenever you're trying to deal with the deficit. We got to deal with all three. So the first leg, which is the fun one, is just grow the economy and any kind of policies to do that. But then you probably got to look at not spending, you got to be controlling spending, but you also have to look at revenue. But you have to look at all three. Everybody wants to talk with just two, either spend more and grow or cut taxes and grow. But we got to be able to do all of them.
What are your biggest revenue targets?
The revenue targets? Well, we're going to look at the tax cuts that Trump put forward, which, as you know, were skewed overwhelmingly for the wealthiest folks, large corporations, everyday folks saw really no tax break whatsoever, and yet it went only for the billionaires and the wealthiest folks and the most successful corporations. And for Democrats, it's like everybody needs to pay their fair share. Let's make sure everybody pays their fair share and make the kind of investments necessary to grow and a middle class as well as grow an economy. And we know that an economy, we heard President Biden talk about it last night, you grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. The top down stuff never has worked. So we got to get back to understanding who is the engine of growth in our economy, and that's everyday working people.
One final one before we do a couple fun ones.
These aren't fun?
I see people nodding off. They're talking about corporate tax rates.
Taxes really get you going.
What's the one state that you're out there watching where you have a vulnerable that has got a noticeable bump because of Biden being swapped out for Harris?
Other states, Nevada has had a nice bump.
Okay.
Yeah, we've definitely seen it in Nevada.
So you see it more in Nevada than Ohio? I would think that Cleveland voters might be.
Yes, I mean we'll see that, but I think Nevada, at least from the numbers we've seen, Nevada has been a good change for us.
That's interesting.
But it's helped all across the battleground states. We've seen it. Our candidates were already running above and had great, because it's all about candidate contrast. We have superior incumbents and candidates and deeply flawed Republicans, similar to what we had last cycle. And so you could paint that contrast. And voters are still going in the voting booth. They have to make a decision. They see two individuals on the ballot, and they'll look at the pluses and minuses. And when you have a deeply flawed candidate that you're running against, that's really great. That's really nice. But you still got to run a good campaign. And so that's where the DS comes in. But what we're seeing, to use an analogy of airplane, maybe it's a lot better to fly with a tailwind than it is with a headwind, and we got a tailwind right now.
Okay. We're going to not talk about motorcycles because my next question is going to be about bourbon. You and I both.
And those two don't mix.
They don't. We don't. I want to give you plenty of time for that. Best bourbon for value in America.
Well, wow, you're going to give me trouble here. But
no, we can do a Michigan one later. It has to be non-Michigan.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Non-Michigan.
Yeah.
So, my go-to, if it's not Michigan, is Woodford Reserve.
Woodford, not High West.
No, Woodford Reserve.
Okay, most underrated distillery in Michigan.
The one that I have gotten to know very well, and this is really hard question because this is Michigan. They're all wonderful, by the way. In fact, I think we're fifth in the state in micro distilleries, but Traverse Whiskey is one that I particularly like.
Okay.
Traverse City is a great place. Please go visit. It's an amazing, amazing place.
And since you're a border state, best Canadian rye.
I don't have one.
Good answer. He stuck the landing.
That's easy.
Okay.
Give me some more softballs.
Well, Senator, we're out of time this morning, so thank you very much for your time. It was a lot of fun. And just a reminder, we have a jam-packed session later on, if I find them here. I know I'm interviewing Gina Raimondo, so that's really the only thing that matters. But we have a lot of other guests that are going to be here, and we really appreciate you coming. So, Senator, thanks again for your time.
Great to be here. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.